Hey guys, my name is Jeremy, and I'm super excited to be starting this series, To Kill a God. And today we will be starting with part one, Why You Don't Really Want God to Exist. And I just want to preface this with a few things. We're going to do this kind of like a podcast type feel scenario. We might expand into some full blown videos and maybe even try to make this in like a book type structure in the future. But I just want to start this series, and I have a few goals in mind. And I also want to preface a few things to let you know basically what this is going to be about, what I expect, and what you should expect. So, first off, my whole purpose here is not to try to prove how we came to be in existence, not to really share exactly what I believe happened, because I'm going to try to say the smartest thing a person can say about why we're here. I don't know. I don't know why or how we got here. Um, and I can't begin to presume um, for sure to tell you that 100% this is why you're here. I have ideas. I like to follow uh, science's explanation, but I'm not going to try to debate whether there's intelligent design, whether there that we evolved. Nothing of that sort. I'm just going to simply focus on the Christian God during this series and explain to you why you don't really want this guy to exist, and then in further episodes, explain to you why he doesn't. And then I believe my hope and goal at the end of this is to prove to you why it's harmful, and also maybe open some minds, change some minds to provide adequate proof that the Christian God does not exist. So before we begin, I have a message to non believers and believers alike. First, I'd like to address non believers, whether you're atheist, agnostic, anything like that. I'm going to tell you beforehand, straight up, the purpose of this is not to be arrogant or try to prove a point in arrogance. This is the pet peeve of a lot of Christians and a lot of believers. Arrogance of atheism and agnosticism and non-believers. And I have to agree with them in this portion. So if you're commenting, or if you're wanting to learn, or if you just want to argue, I'm hoping that you don't do that in the comments. I'm hoping that that's not the place for this, because you're never going to reach people with arrogance, and that's not going to be my approach either. I'm not going to tell people that they're stupid for believing what they believe, because they're not stupid. They were taught these things. Uh, you're never gonna change someone's mind or opinion with arrogance. So that's not what I'm here for, and that's what I'm hoping you don't try to use this information to do. Um, so Christians, I'd actually like to address you guys before we start too. The purpose of this series, again, is to provide you with new information. So, just as I would say to non believers, don't be arrogant, I'd say the same thing to believers. Try not to be arrogant. Try to look at this stuff with an open mind. This isn't me coming at your religion to tell you, just to tell you you're wrong. I have I have a purpose in this. I have, like I said, a goal to show you that that Christianity, religion in general, but mostly Christianity we're focusing on here, is harmful. And so, I'm going to answer some questions that I've seen that a lot of believers ask to non-believers. And one of those I'm going to answer here in just a few moments is, why do you care? Well, I saw a Christian person present belief in this way. If if I didn't believe in unicorns, I wouldn't go around telling people that I didn't believe in unicorns. I would just live my life in a way, such a way that unicorns didn't exist. and I wouldn't feel the need to tell other people that they didn't exist. Okay? And I see that from a lot of believers. Why do you care? Why can't you just let it be? Believe what you want to believe. Well, I can tell you why. Because unicorns don't become, people that believe in unicorns don't become presidents. They don't become world leaders. They don't influence what we're taught in school, what we're taught in society. They don't set up our moral standards of what's right and wrong. And they don't dictate where we go in the afterlife. Christianity does all those things. So it's not absurd for me to care and for me to put an opinion out there, because that's what Christianity does. That's one of the bases of Christianity, is to go reach out to all people, to tell them about Jesus, to tell them about God, so that they will not go to hell. They have a direct command to spread their belief. And so it's kind of a double standard to say, well, why do you care? Why do you feel the need to try to disprove God? Well, the Christians feel the need to prove God. They feel the need to spread the message. So I think it's fairly healthy and really not a problem that I try to do the same. So anyways, this episode I plan on answering the question, and this is a big one. What does it hurt if I believe in God and turn out to be wrong? This is a big question that I see Christians ask. What does it hurt if I believe and then I'm wrong? And the basis, I guess, of this thought process is, well, if I'm wrong, I just don't go to heaven or hell. But if I'm right, I do go to heaven. And so it's just focusing, I guess, on the spiritual aspect. My lesson here is going to show you that it does have negative consequences to believe, just to believe, and teach the belief and pass the belief on. So we're going to get into that on future episodes here. We're going to answer questions like, if God doesn't exist, then is there morality? This is another thing that I see that a lot of believers ask. Like, can you be moral if you're not a Christian or Muslim or some kind of other religion? And there seems to be this idea or concept that if there was no God, there's no person guiding us, then would we be running around murdering each other, raping, killing, stealing all the time? I plan on answering that question. In the future, I plan on answering, does intelligent design prove God exists? Okay? So again, I'm not saying there is intelligent design. I'm not going to speculate on that. But I'm going to address the question that if we could prove intelligent design, does it necessarily mean that God exists? Okay? So, many more questions other than that. But anyways, we're going to get into basically now why you don't really want God to exist. And if you're still listening and haven't turned this off, haven't been offended yet, I thank you. So basically what I'm going to use here, guys, is the Bible. So just for the sake of this lesson, we're going to say that God exists. We're just going to say he does, okay? We're going to act as God as a person because that's the only thing we really know to compare it to. And you can say, well, God's God, he's not a person. But what we're going to try to do is get to the core of who God is as a character. What he values, what he does, what are his actions, so we can kind of define God and get a better understanding of him. To do that, I'm going to use the Bible, and the Bible only at first. Christianity is really focused on the Bible, specifically the New Testament. A lot of what I'm going to go over today is in the Old Testament, but there are some New Testament things I'm going to share um, about the character of God so we can kind of get a better understanding. So, if you've been to church or if you've listened to any kind of preacher or any kind of nice Christian lady that you've met, you've heard the sentence that God is love. And what they base that belief on is a few books in the New Testament, and what you learn about God is love. That God came, He died to forgive all our sins so we could all have the potential to go to heaven and have eternal happy life. That's just one part of the Bible. That's just one characteristic of God. We can really get a better understanding of God looking at the Old Testament because you have more appearances of God. You have more of God showing Himself and speaking and describing how He felt. You literally get the idea of what God is feeling and thinking in the Old Testament because it flat out tells you. Now, I'm going to say this too. If you're going to take the Bible, you have to take the whole Bible. You can't just base your beliefs on part of the Bible. That's not going to work. For a basic understanding of these lessons, you're going to have to accept that the Bible is the Bible as a whole, that it explains who God is, and you can't just cut out the parts you don't like. We all have to have that basic understanding. If you don't have that basic understanding, I'd say stop watching now, or stop listening now, because you're not going to go anywhere if you just try to pick and choose what you believe in the Bible. Everything I'm bringing up here is in the Bible. You can reference it, cross-check it. I'll probably put the passages like where you can find these things in the Bible in the description below. So here's my claim. God is the most prolific serial killer that's ever existed. He's the most jealous, angry creature with the most murders under his belt than any other being that's ever existed. So let's just kind of jump in here and listen to some of these stories that God had a hand in. And let's start from the beginning. You know, God created Adam and Eve. He made this tree of the knowledge of good and evil and told them not to eat from it. And since they ate from it, they gained the knowledge of good and evil, and therefore they had sinned. And then from then on, every human born into existence was born into a sin. So there was a fundamental problem with you for being born after Adam and Eve. So you were born with a problem, born with a sin, and you needed to sacrifice to be able to repent of this sin. So all these stories happen after those things and derive from the fact that people sin and people make bad choices. All right. So God killed a lot of people. He killed a lot of people, and it's accepted much by Christians that, well, God had good reason. So I want to go over a few stories, and I want you to be the judge of these stories and how they make sense to you. So God had a man named Eliseus, and I'm going to paraphrase these stories just to make it a little bit easier to understand. And I picked out multiple stories here, which is just a drop in the water. There's hundreds, but I'm going to pick out the most easiest to understand stories that shows what God did in response to people that sinned or didn't do what He wanted or disobeyed or even complained. Just so you can kind of get a representation of what He does in these instances. So God had his guy Eliseus, which he liked a lot, and Eliseus was walking along one day, and some kids came up and started making fun of him. What did they make fun of him for? Well, because he was bald, which I'm sorry, a little bit comical, but they started making fun of the bald man. Eliseus I guess, had some insecurities about his baldness, so he got angry with the children and he cursed them to God. And he's like, "Ah, those children! I can't believe they did that." And so, not right. The kids make fun of them. Kind of a jerk move. But what do you think the appropriate punishment for that was? Would it be spanking? Would it be put in the corner? Would it be a timeout? No, God sent two bears, the creatures bears, to murder, to maim and kill 42 kids because they made fun of Elysius for being bald. Sounds a little harsh, but let's move on. Alright, we have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, God said these are evil cities. There were people practicing homosexuality in these cities, and God did not like that. It's a no-no. So God decided to destroy both of these cities. Now, pretty basic. Everybody has the understanding of that. But I want you to really think about that, because we get this, like, we kind of take a stance away from this. Like, we pull ourselves out of a human body when we read this story, because we don't think about that there were women and children in these cities. That it wasn't just gay men having sex. Now, God describes the whole cities as evil, doing evil acts, but there were 5-year-old children, there were smaller children, there were children under 10 years old, there were women that obeyed their husbands. All these people were murdered because of the acts of some. And so, really, if you accept the fact that everyone in this city was evil, you have to also accept the fact that the children were evil. Is that possible? I don't know. You tell me. In Exodus, God was about to kill Moses for no clear reason, and then he changed his mind. And Moses is a really big part of the Bible. If you look at Exodus 4 and the verses 24, God was just about to just straight up murder Moses, and we get no context of why. Alright, this is just one dude, but that one guy could have changed the course of how we read this entire Bible, because there's a lot of stories about Moses. Moses is the guy that led the Israelites out of Egypt when they were in slavery. You know, God helped, he told and helped the Israelites many times to invade other towns. And so what happened is, after the Israelites were led out of slavery in Egypt, they were kind of just wandering around in the desert. They had no place to be, no place to go. And so God was like, I'm going to give you guys land. And of course, the Israelites were all for that. Well, God did give them the land, but the problem was it was occupied. And so what they had to do basically is go to war with these other cities that were and people that were already there occupying the land that Israel wanted, the Israelites wanted. So many towns like Jericho and Bashan, and there were several towns that they attacked. God usually required the death of everybody in the town, all the men, but not only the men, all the women and children, and the animals. Every part had to be destroyed. Sometimes there were some instances where he spared specific individuals, but the consensus was really kill all the men, kill all the women, kill all the children. The crime that these women and children had committed was the fact that they weren't born into God's preferred race. And so for that, they had to die. They were occupying the wrong land. Okay? When speaking to Aaron about priests, they were trying to decide who they would allow to be priest, who they would allow to make offerings to God. So there had to be specific instructions of who could perform these duties as a priest. And the consensus was that God really didn't like ugly people. He wouldn't allow people with blemishes to approach. He wouldn't allow people with blindness. If you had a crippled hand or a foot, if you were a dwarf, If you were a dwarf, you couldn't approach, you couldn't be a priest to approach God's holy place to make an offering. Okay? And the most absurd and obscene thing, and I don't even know how they checked this, but if you had damaged testicles, you could not be a priest. It's like, got something happened to you, you know, it hurt your manhood. Sorry. Yeah, I can't allow that. I wanna go over another story that everyone kind of knows, but again they take themselves out of. If you look at the story of Noah, okay, Noah Noah's story is that God was just sick of everyone on the planet. I mean, we're talking millions of people, millions, okay, and only Noah and his family did he really like these guys and think that they were godly. That we have this idea again that everyone else that existed in the world was evil. So God was like, I'm going to destroy everything. He even contemplated destroying Noah and his family, but he's like, no, I'm going to save them. And so Noah builds the boat. He gets two of every kind of animal on it. And if you think about that, you know, I think we can have a disconnect for all the animals that drowned and died at that point, since there was only two of each that survived in that story. And we're taught this story kind of like as a happy story. I've seen it in like coloring books. I've seen it in church and in schools, and it's just like there's a rainbow and all these animals. There's like cartoon characters. All these animals are coming off of the ark. It's really a horrible story if you can put yourself in the position of I'm a human being, and there were lots of other human beings that drowned to death. Okay, again, not just evil men. We had women and children that drowned to death by the millions because God didn't think that they measured up to the standards of worship and the actions, and that he just wanted a reset. He wanted to reset. So you take this story and you add a disconnect because God is good and God must make the best decisions, and then somehow you justify in your mind it must have been okay for him to drown all those women and children, pregnant women, all the animals. I mean, are animals inherently evil? Should we care about them? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. All right. Um, God likes to interfere with bets too. I'm going to give you two examples here. Okay, Samson, which was like this one of God's guys, he was really strong. God would often give him power to defeat his enemies. Made a bet. He made a bet with these men, and he gave him a riddle. I'm not going to get into all about what the riddle was, but he gave him a riddle, and he said, if you solve my riddle, I'll give you 30 sets of clothes. New clothes. And these guys, and he says, if you can't solve my riddle, you've got to give me those 30 sets of clothes. Okay? Well, Samson's wife kind of cheats, and she tells the men the answer to the riddle. And so the men come back and they answer Samson's riddle. They cheated, but he was like, all right, that's fair. I owe you these 30 sets of clothes now. So where did he go get these clothes? Did he go buy them? No. Did he go get them out of his drawer? No. God filled him with power. No joke. God filled him with power, and then he found 30 people and murdered them and took their clothes. For no apparent reason. We don't have any preface that these were evil men that he killed for these garments. We don't have any indication of that. It was just like, oh, God's gonna help me get these clothes by murdering these people. You know, it's the truth. It's what's in the Bible, right? We talked about the Israelites leaving Egypt. Do you know that they complained? They complained a lot in the desert. See, they wandered around the desert for 40 years, and they didn't like the food that they had, and they didn't. Some of them were dying, and they didn't like some of the things that were going on. So, God didn't like the complaints. He decided to kill lots of them with an earthquake. He also sent some plagues on them, like a plague of snakes, things like that, because they shouldn't complain. All right. At which point they complained about God killing them. Uh, and then at which point his response was, I'm going to kill 14,700 more of you with a plague. Then the complaining stopped. You tell me, I guess they should have just shut up at that moment, right? I mean, think about all the times you complain about little things at work. Um, think about some of these things that these people did that you do and that maybe you'd be guilty of. Would you be considered a holy person that would be able to be that would get on that boat with Noah, or would he question your actions and maybe drown you as well? Okay. Um, let's look at a story, another bet story of Job. Job was a godly man. That was God's dude. That was God's guy. And God and the devil were talking about Job, and God's like, "That's my man. That's Job. He's the one that I trust. That worships me no matter what." And the devil said, "Well, he only worships you because you give him stuff and you take care of him." And so they essentially make a bet. The devil's like, "Let me mess with Job, and he'll curse you." And so it goes further and further to the point where God allows the devil to kill Job's children, to kill all his animals, to burn his house down, to destroy all his wealth, even to the point where he covers him in boils. Uh, but God leaves at this point his nagging wife to tell him how wrong he is for uh, just being. And so Job gets to the point where he's like, I wish I never existed. And then God gives him this long lecture after that, and he provides him with new children and new animals and more wealth. All right. Again, another instance of God killing children. And you again at the end, Christians think of this story in a positive light, that God gave him new children, that he had more things than he had before. Let me ask you, as a sane, logical person, if your child died, if three of your children died, and you got three more new ones, would that make up for those three lost children? No, you wouldn't be happier. You'd still miss the first three children. Those were your children. So, I mean, it's not a happy story. If anything, it's kind of like, okay, he got some stuff, but I wouldn't have traded the death of my first however many children for all this new crap. Um, it's weird how we get into this mentality as Christians that these stories are good and have a good outcome when they don't. And we're really starting to see what kind of person God is, that he'll just use us to prove a point in a bet. It's happened multiple times. Okay. Um, when I talked about the Israelites being stuck in the desert and they were attacking these cities, and they were murdering all the men, women, and children, they were told, even the animals, they were told, don't take any of the animals, don't take any of their gold, leave all that crap. Um, well, Achan didn't listen to that. He ended up taking some treasure for himself and he hid it from one of the conquered towns. So God had Joshua, and it says in all of Israel, all the Israelites, they brought Achan out with all his sons and his daughters and his animals, and they brought him in a valley, and they, as a nation and people, proceeded to stone to death. This stone means you literally pick up rocks and throw them until someone's dead. They stoned to death Achan and his sons and daughters because God told them to, and the animals. And then, just for good measure, after that, they also burned all of them. So we have a guy that I guess committed a crime. It was keeping some of the loot from some of the places that they pillaged. and the punishment for that was being stoned to death. Now, again, try to relate to these stories. Think about if God existed and you've ever stolen anything, you deserve to be stoned to death. You got to understand that the Bible says that God doesn't change who he is. He's who he is. So just because Jesus came doesn't mean that God isn't the person that's in the Bible. Okay? God killed 70,000 because David took a census. King David wanted to know how much people it was. God took this as kind of a distrust or disobedience, so God just kills 70,000 people. 70,000 just because of disobedience. Not King David, who committed the disobedience, and it wasn't the first time that he punished the Israelites for the king's actions. He's like, you made a mistake, I'm going to murder some innocent people now. And so you're going to learn from this. You're going to learn today. All right? These are just some simple Bible stories, okay? From this, we start to learn that God chooses to murder people for petty offenses. If you don't consider some of these offenses petty, sometimes you're just murdered for being a child born in the wrong place under the wrong people. Okay? This, again, these stories are just a drop in the water of how many times God has killed people in the Bible for less. Okay? Or tortured them. I want to use one more example, and that's when the Israelites were in Egypt, held as slaves to the Egyptians, and God sent Moses. If you know this story, the Pharaoh wouldn't let the Israelites go, so God sent plagues upon the Egyptians to show his power. Plagues like toads, locusts, hail, and these plagues killed people, by the way. Again, because of Pharaoh's actions. But the main point in this story, and I want you guys to realize this, Pharaoh kind of wanted to let these Israelites go. He saw that like bad stuff was happening, these plagues were happening in Egypt, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna let them go, because I want this crap to stop happening. He didn't want his people to die. He didn't want his people to suffer. But the problem with this story is we're literally told that God changed Pharaoh's mind. He says it in a way that he hardened his heart. So every time Pharaoh was about to let the Israelites go, God changed the Pharaoh's mind. Meaning he literally took away his free will, made him angry about it, so that he wouldn't let the people go, which is what we thought God wanted, just to prove his point, so another plague would happen where people would die. And so hell came, darkness came. Some of these plagues, like I said, some of the Egyptians died during these plagues according to the Bible. And every time that you thought it might be over, God went in and he changed Pharaoh's mind again. Again, causing these things to happen. And the final plague, if you know it, is when God came at night and he killed every firstborn child of the Egyptians. Again, children. Because the Pharaoh, who he made think and believe the way he did, wouldn't let go of the slave Israelites. And so all those children had to die, and we have estimates of maybe even 500,000. Okay? Because God intervened and God wanted to show his power. Alright? At this point, after all these children died, if you know the story, they did let the Israelites leave, but only after all these atrocities had to happen. Time after time after time, we're seeing God kill women, kill children. I don't know about you, but I can't look at a child and say, God, that child is evil for existing. God is right to kill children. I can't do that. I can't logically do that. Okay? So, the problem is a lot of Christians try to dismiss these stories. They don't focus on them. They're just like, oh, yeah, this was shaky times in the Old Testament, man, but now God is love. He's different now. God's different. It's like we just want to ignore the fact, and we can't ignore it, okay? But like, let's play devil's advocate here and say we can ignore the Old Testament and the atrocities that happened in the Old Testament. All right. Well, what about now? Okay. 9 million children under 5 die a year. Now. This is now. This is not in the Old Testament. That's about 17 a minute. How some of these children are not dying in natural causes, meaning some of these children are dying in pain or alone or suffering or being killed. This is 17 a minute, okay? This is God now. So we don't have God appear like he did in the Old Testament. So it's not actually God commanding these children to die, but this is happening now, and there's mothers and fathers praying for missing children or praying for these children, and they still die. So we have to assume one of three things: that God can either do nothing to help them, or he doesn't care to, okay? Or he doesn't exist. So he's either impotent, evil, or doesn't exist. Impotent meaning he just doesn't care. He's just like, it's not my responsibility to save the children, it's yours, okay? That's your loving God, all right? God built a heaven and a hell. In order to reach heaven, you have to believe in God and try not to sin. All right? But if you do not believe in God, you are doomed to hell. Okay? So, if you are born to the wrong culture and you haven't really learned about God, like let's take Hindus for instance. Christians, you'd have to think that Hindus were born into the wrong culture through no fault of their own. They were born into sin, original sin, and they die and go to hell for eternity, according to Christianity, because maybe they worship a monkey god or an elephant god, and they don't really know the Christian God. Okay? You can argue semantics all you want about those facts, but according to Christianity, to get to heaven, you got to believe in God. Okay? You can try to say that there's some kind of purgatory afterwards, but the Bible doesn't mention that. The Bible mentions heaven and hell. All right? So we have billions of people that God, a loving God, sends to hell, where you're tortured, by the way, for all eternity by burning in a lake of fire, that just don't know about him. So we're thinking billions of people before now, and billions of people like the Hindus, for instance, that just don't know and are unaware. All right? You can try to argue semantics and say, again, it's the Old Testament. God sent Jesus. Okay? Let me give you a New Testament example then about how God plans to act in the future. Okay? So, Revelation. It's the last book in the Bible. It talks about what's going to happen. Guess what? God's going to send more plagues. He's going to murder more people. He's going to starve more people. He's going to destroy a third of, it seems like, a third of everything. And guess what? In that third, it's going to include women, children, animals, pregnant women. It's going to include everyone. Okay? There's some idea about maybe if you're a Christian, you get to go to the rapture, which really isn't a biblical thing, by the way. We can address that another time. But God's going to send death again. He's going to send plagues. He's going to starve people to death in the future. Not in the Old Testament, in the future. And then the world's going to end in war. There's going to be just death and war galore and torture and suffering. All this has to happen so that God can create a new life with us afterwards. Okay? So if you think God has changed in the Old Testament, go read Revelation. It's going to tell you exactly who God is. I mean, it sounds like the same God that was in the Old Testament to me. The point of this is, guys, is we have this character that we know, that we've learned about, and we only ever acknowledge one facet of him. That's love. But there's so many more, okay? He supports slavery in the Bible. Women are lesser in the Bible. God is racist in the Bible, okay? I mean, he literally prefers Israelites and Jews over any other people. And he was like killing, he was okay with the Jews killing anyone that wasn't a Jew at one time. All right? The problem here, guys, is that we've got a broken God. All right? We've created a monster. And men created this idea of God. They told these stories. They wrote these stories down. We don't have just a loving God. We have a jealous, vengeance, racist God that if he was alive today, and this is the point, this is the title here, do you really want God to exist? Because if he existed today, we're screwed. I'm screwed. You're screwed. We have no chance. I mean, you and I, we probably sin daily. You know, we've done things that are questionable, things that God would have just straight out murdered us for in the past. I complain. You complain. Have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever cheated? Have you ever committed adultery? Have you ever done these things? Okay? Those things, according to God, a lot of times require death and torture. All right? I mean, we're coming from a place that it used to take animal sacrifice to absolve us of our sins. We literally had to kill animals to be clean. We had, you know, I mean, if you look at any kind of pagan god in the past and how you've had to sacrifice animals or give blood in some way to satisfy God, we had to do that with Christianity. We're not different in the fact. You can say Jesus came and then now you no longer have to do that because his blood covered everything, but we still had to. Our basis came from that, all right? The point is, guys, most Christians and most just people in existence that call on the name of God don't really understand what kind of character he is. Okay? I want you to really think about that. If God existed, are you in trouble? I mean, you know, the Bible says to have a fear of God. And if he exists, I would be very afraid. And it says fear is the beginning of love. Okay? Can you really love something that you fear? Christians are going to say yes to this. But like, let's say your dad just beats you and you're afraid to come home because he beats you. Okay? You're not going to love him the same way that you would love and care for a dad that was there for you, that gave you good things, that helped you with your math test, that shared life experiences with you, that took you to Disney World. No, fear is not love. Okay? We have a scary God. We have a monster that we've made in our mind, and there's something wrong with this. And we shouldn't. And then in following episodes, we're going to get into why God doesn't exist. But this is to teach you the character of God and why you really don't want him to exist. All right? Because if he does, again, we're screwed. Okay? Now, coming towards the end here, but I want to answer a question knowing that what we know about God's character, knowing about his actions, knowing about some of the things he's done, um, I want to answer a question that I know that many Christians have. What's wrong with me believing in God, um, and it doesn't hurt anybody? I've heard that. All right? I want to share a few things with you where I feel like that's an incorrect statement. Okay? Um, First of all, um, I'm just going to give you an example of something that I remembered that happened to me in school. Uh, well, let me just tell you the story, okay? So, I remember going into science class in public high school, and as we opened up the books in the first weeks and started to learn about evolution, one student stated very loudly, "I didn't evolve from no stupid monkey." Okay? The class laughed, and as did I. We were, see, we were raised in Christian homes, most of us. We were in the Bible Belt, and I, like most students in my class, were completely turned off to the idea of evolution. We had been taught by parents and church that was simply not true. Okay? So, in response to being forced to listen to the science teacher's idea of how the world came to be and how we came to be, which our Christian faith completely denied, we often argued with the teacher or tuned him out. I and many of my peers completely neglected and had no interest in science class because it conflicted with our beliefs. Needless to say, not many of us went on to become science majors. And herein lies a problem. Simply believing in Christianity caused a large percentage of my class and of all children in my school to not have a basic appreciation for science. We built a mental wall against it. Because Christianity is ingrained in our brains by parents and church, our children are less likely to become scientists, astronauts, doctors, marine biologists, and the list goes on and on. Simply put, there'd be more cures for diseases, better solutions for clean water, more scientists and doctors working on cures for cancer, better understanding of the brain and mental illness if religion wasn't accepted over science. Okay? I want you to think about that for a minute. So, just the fact of believing in Christianity and promoting it to your children and your peers shut the idea of other beliefs out. Okay? I mean, Christianity and evolution, no matter what you say, guys, can't coexist because God says in the Bible, first chapter of Genesis, God created one man and one woman. And science teaches that we evolved from lesser beings. Okay, I'm not saying we evolved from monkeys. I'm saying we evolved from lesser beings. Okay, um, they can't coincide. So we joked about it and laughed and how stupid it was that, oh, we didn't come from no monkeys. And because of it, we weren't interested in the class. We didn't really want to learn. We were turned off to it. We put a wall against the basic fundamentals of science. And you can't argue that fact. That if religion wasn't taught as truth by parents, by peers, by church, we would have more scientists, more doctors. It's you can argue semantics all you want. You can say, well, there's Christian doctors and scientists. Sure, there are, but there's a large number that aren't. That would be if they had a better understanding of how the world came to be or science in general. Listen, we can't ignore the fact that teaching people that there is a God and that other beliefs can't be true won't have a negative effect because it absolutely does. All right, I can pull up numbers for you guys all day if you want me to do that, but the fact is there's less people concerned about science and the future of humanity because they believe that there's an afterlife where they get to go spend um, paradise forever in joy and happiness. Where their diseases will be cured there. Let me live my life going around telling people about Jesus rather than becoming a doctor and actually helping people. Okay, um, it's not the only example, guys. When you're taught Christianity, like me, when you're taught Christianity as a child, um, you have to try to wrap your head around this idea that you're wrong for being born. Okay, you have the basic problem of sin. You're a sinner because you were born. Okay, it's because of what Adam and Eve did. You have a problem with you, and the only way to deal with that problem is to try not to sin and ask Jesus for forgiveness of your sins, and then pray to Him and live your life in such a way that He outlines for you. Okay? So, what you're doing is you're instilling guilt into children, and it's a hard concept. It's the just the idea that there was something wrong with me, that I knew there was something wrong with me because the church taught me that for being born. It's kind of solidified this idea like that I have a problem. There's something wrong with me, and I felt this guilt. All right, like I'm never gonna be good enough. And when you teach a child that, it sticks with them. Think about a young woman. Think about a young girl. Okay, she has this idea of what's right and wrong because she's learned it from her parents or from the Bible or from church, just for believing. And she makes a mistake. Maybe young girl, she sleeps with a young boy. Okay. Uh, Her peers find out. They make fun of her. She has this guilt now, and she feels like she's a sinner. She's wrong. You realize that this is, but that basic shame of guilt. I'm a sinner and I messed up and I've done something wrong. Do you realize like that's the kind of stuff that starts mental problems in young people? That's the kind of stuff that starts that girls start cutting over. That's the kind of things that children commit suicide over. So when you teach a child that there's a problem with you just because you exist, and that it's not okay to make mistakes, because I mean it's really not, according to Christianity, it's really not okay to make these mistakes. And if you do, you're you're really in trouble, whether it be from repercussions of a angry God or for your eternal salvation. You bring this kind of guilt and depression and mental problem for young people that they can't handle. You know, instead of telling a young girl that she shouldn't have sex before marriage and she's wrong, um, uh, slut, we should teach about sex, when, you know, how to practice safe sex, not avoid it as a thing to wait until you're married and you're not an evil person because you did have sex. All right, these are just two instances where just believing and teaching and passing on this belief has negative consequences in our society. Okay, the third and biggest is that religion separates us. All right, there's no denying this. It creates anger in family, in friends, and in different nations. You realize that wars are fought over different beliefs and a difference of ideas. Okay, do you know that there's families that just shut out someone that doesn't believe the same that they do and doesn't want anything to do with them? I mean, you can see this in the Muslim culture, but not just the Muslim culture, in the Amish culture, in the Christian culture. I'm I've been that person, okay? You know, religion separates us. I mean, the Bible even says if you're a Christian, you shouldn't marry someone that's not a Christian. Okay, you can't have the basic fundamentals of love with another person that believes something different than you. You're not supposed to fall in love and spend your life with that person. That's what the Bible teaches. All right? That's what the religion you pass on teaches, okay? So I care. I care because there's a problem. I care because we've created a world that is a facade in the fact that God is a loving God and He's here for us, and we can just kind of believe what we want to believe. You know? Like about God. We can take the good things and leave out the bad. We can't do that. So we really have to question, do you want God to exist? Do you really want Him to? What, so you can go to heaven? What about life here on earth? What about the time that you're here? What about the family and loved ones that you have? I mean, the whole basis of this series is to open your mind up. I really want you to consider that. What kind of position would we as humans and we as people be if God exists? Because I mean, He's going to have to destroy a bunch of other nations as is for not believing in Him, like the Hindus, the Muslims, because only one can be right. All right. In the next few episodes, we'll actually start to get into, does God exist? I know that some of you are wanting to hear my views and thoughts on that. I know some of you are just waiting to pick some of this stuff apart. That's fine. I can take it. Hey, I will try to talk to you all day, um, and we can talk in civilized manner as long as you don't start to be angry and disrespectful. I will debate and talk with any of you. We can do that. Not a problem. All right. Um, I thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. Hopefully, you got something out of this. Hopefully, you learned a new perspective. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. I think we're going to get into does God exist next episode. All right? You guys have a great day.